Professor Evans paced the front of the lecture hall, his voice a captivating melody weaving through the epic tale of Beowulf. But for Sammie, the words blurred into a background hum. Her gaze kept drifting to him, drawn to the way his brow furrowed in concentration when a particularly knotty passage arose, or how his eyes crinkled at the corners when a line resonated with him. He was more than just a professor. He was a force of nature, captivating not just with his knowledge, but with a raw passion that ignited something deep within her. A shiver danced down her spine as their eyes locked for a fleeting moment. Professor Evans' breath hitched, his surprise mirrored in Sammie's wide eyes. The heat in her cheeks only intensified as the lecture concluded. Most students scurried out, eager for their weekend freedom. But Sammie lingered, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She fidgeted with her notebook, pretending to review notes, but her mind was a chaotic storm of stolen glances and unspoken desires. Finally, with a deep breath, she approached his desk. Professor Evans looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before a professional smile settled on his lips. "Professor Evans," Sammie began, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Miss Carter," he replied, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. I was a little confused about Grendel's motivations in the text," she stammered, internally kicking herself for the flimsy excuse. Professor Evans raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. Confused, or perhaps intrigued. Sammie felt her cheeks burn even hotter. Intrigued, maybe, she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. A smile played on Professor Evans' lips. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Grendel is a complex creature, Miss Carter. Perhaps over a cup of coffee sometime, we can delve deeper into his motivations." Sammie's breath caught in her throat. The invitation hung in the air, a blatant invitation that crossed a professional boundary yet sent a thrill through her. "Coffee," she squeaked, her voice barely audible. "Indeed," he replied, his gaze lingering on her for a beat too long. "Unless, of course, you prefer to dissect Beowulf's rage alone." His eyes twinkled with a challenge, and Sammie knew she was caught. The professor-student dynamic was a dangerous line to cross, but the forbidden spark between them was simply too enticing to ignore. "Coffee sounds lovely," she managed, a shaky smile playing on her lips. Days bled into weeks, a carefully choreographed dance of stolen glances and near misses. Sammie felt like a character in a forbidden romance novel, her heart skipping a beat whenever Professor Evans was near. He, in turn, seemed to mirror her caution, their interactions limited to polite smiles and brief classroom exchanges. The weight of their secret, the unspoken awareness simmering beneath the surface, was both thrilling and agonizing. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sammie found herself in the campus library, desperately trying to bury herself in a mountain of research papers. But Professor Evans' face kept flashing in her mind, his voice echoing in her ears. Suddenly, he appeared at the corner of her vision, browsing the stacks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Should she pretend not to see him? Strike up a casual conversation? The internal debate raged on until he spotted her, a surprised smile breaking across his face. "Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice a low murmur that sent goosebumps erupting on her skin. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Professor Evans," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just drowning myself in research as usual." He chuckled, the sound warm and inviting. "Research, or perhaps escaping the drudgery of another introductory lecture?" Sammie laughed, a nervous sound that betrayed her turmoil. Maybe a bit of both. An awkward silence descended between them, thick with unspoken desires. Sammie fidgeted with her pen, her gaze flitting around the room to avoid his intense stare. "Professor," she began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question gnawing at her. "Please call me Alexander," he interjected gently. "We're not in the classroom, Miss Carter, or should I say Sammie?" The informality sent a jolt through her. "Alexander," she whispered, the name feeling foreign yet strangely intimate on her tongue. "What troubles you, Sammie?" His voice was soft, laced with a concern that made her heart melt. "It's everything," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way I feel, the way you look at me, it's wrong, isn't it?" Alexander's gaze softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. "Perhaps," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "But ignoring it feels wrong too, doesn't it?" Sammie nodded, a tear welling up in her eye. They were trapped in a no-win situation, a forbidden spark that threatened to consume them both. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the frantic rhythm of Sammie's heart. She stood outside Professor Evans', or rather Alexander's, apartment, the decision that had been churning in her gut for weeks finally demanding action. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was a mistake, a transgression too great to ignore. But the thought of another week spent pretending, another stolen glance across a crowded room, was unbearable. The door swung open, revealing Alexander in a worn t-shirt and jeans, his hair damp from the storm. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by concern when he saw the storm raging in her eyes. "Sammie, what are you doing here?" His voice was a warm rumble, a familiar comfort in the midst of the chaos. The words stuck in her throat. Shame and desire warred within her, paralyzing her tongue. Finally, she managed a shaky breath. I can't pretend anymore," she'd let it out, tears stinging her eyes. This feeling between us, it's tearing me apart." A flicker of understanding crossed Alexander's face, followed by a deep sigh. He ushered her inside, the warmth of the apartment a stark contrast to the chilling rain outside. He closed the door behind them, shutting out the world for a moment. "Sammie," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "You know this is wrong. The consequences could be disastrous for both of us." Sammie stepped closer, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor in her hands. "I know," she admitted, tears spilling over. "But pretending is worse. I need to know, is it just me, or do you feel it too?" His gaze held hers for a long, agonizing moment. The storm outside seemed to quiet, replaced by the deafening silence between them. Then he reached out, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with a gentle touch that sent a jolt through her. "Sammie," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "The moment I met you, it felt like a dam broke inside me. You ignite a fire in me that I can't explain." His words unleashed a torrent of emotions within her. Relief, fear, and a burning desire all intertwined. She leaned into his touch, the need for him overwhelming. "Then don't let it go out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll figure it out together. Just don't push me away anymore." He pulled her close, the warmth of his embrace a haven in the storm. "I won't," he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "But know this, Sammie, this changes everything." As their lips met in a desperate kiss, the weight of the forbidden spark finally ignited. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. A year had spun past in a whirlwind of stolen weekends, late-night conversations, and the constant, gnawing fear of discovery. Yet, beneath the shadow of secrecy, their love had only intensified. Sammie's graduation ceremony marked a turning point, a bittersweet celebration that heralded a new chapter. As she stood on stage, diploma clutched in sweaty hands, her eyes searched the crowd. There, amongst the sea of proud faces, was Alexander. His gaze held a pride that went beyond her academic achievement. It held the quiet triumph of a battle hard won. Later, amidst the confetti and congratulations, he caught her hand, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a familiar, heart-melting smile. "Dr. Carter," he teased, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. Sammie playfully swatted at his arm, Professor Evans, still clinging to formalities even after all this time. "Just a little reminder of where we started," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "A forbidden spark that defied all the rules." A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Well, those rules don't apply anymore," she declared, a newfound confidence blooming in her chest. "Not entirely," Alexander countered, a hint of worry flickering in his eyes. "The whispers still follow us, Sammie. The university may not fire me, but acceptance, that might take longer." Sammie squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We faced the storm once, Alexander. We can face it again, together." He looked at her, a surge of love and admiration flooding his features. "Together," he echoed, his voice filled with conviction. "Always." Their journey wasn't over. There would be challenges, judgmental glances, and the constant need to prove their love wasn't a mere student-teacher fling. But standing there, hand in hand, with a future stretching before them, Sammie knew they could face anything. The forbidden spark had ignited a fire, and it burned brighter than ever, illuminating the path towards a new dawn. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of old books, a comforting combination that filled their tiny apartment. Nestled amongst stacks of moving boxes, Sammie and Alexander surveyed their new domain, a quaint one-bedroom on the outskirts of the city. Every chipped floorboard and peeling wallpaper whispered of fresh starts and shared dreams. Sammie, perched precariously on a wobbly stepladder, carefully placed a worn copy of Beowulf on a bookshelf. "There," she announced, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. Forbidden fruit turned literary companion. Alexander chuckled, handing her a steaming mug. A fitting symbol, wouldn't you say? Our love story, defying expectations, just like Grendel's monstrous rampage. She took a sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through her. "Except our story has a happier ending," she teased, nudging him playfully. "No mid-holes being devoured by angry beasts." "True," he conceded, leaning in to steal a kiss. "But there will be challenges, my love. Whispers still follow us, and some colleagues might not be so accepting." Sammie placed her mug down, a determined glint in her eyes. "We faced them before, Alexander. We proved our love wasn't a fleeting spark. It's a wildfire, and it won't be extinguished by judgmental whispers." He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze tender. "You always know what to say, don't you?" "Just the truth," she replied, leaning into his touch. "Besides, who needs their acceptance when we have each other?" Their shared laughter echoed through the small space, a symphony of defiance against the doubts and challenges that lay ahead. Later that evening, after unpacking boxes and assembling furniture, they sat nestled on the worn-out sofa, watching the cityscape shimmer under the twilight sky. "This is our home, Sammie," Alexander murmured, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "A testament to our love story, defying the odds." Sammie snuggled closer, a sense of contentment washing over her. "Our very own forbidden haven," she replied, tracing a pattern on his hand. Looking out at the twinkling cityscape, a symbol of endless possibilities, she knew their journey was far from over. But with Alexander by her side, she felt ready to face any storm. The forbidden spark that ignited their love had transformed into a blazing inferno, illuminating not just their apartment, but the path toward a future filled with shared dreams and unwavering love.